Let's turn to some perspective now from inside those protests. Joining me is Masara Makati. She's a reporter from the Times-Union who's been covering these protests all the past week, speaking to people in the Black community and other people at the protests. Masara, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Anytime. So tell me what it's been like inside these protests, because I feel like people watch them on TV, they hear about them on the radio, but they don't really understand what it is like for the most part to be actually in them and feel that energy. Tell me what you've experienced.
Emotion. I mean, if there's like one word that I would use to describe it, it's emotion. When you're going to, I've been to protests almost every single day this week, starting with last Saturday, and there's just this collective grief and pain from everyone in the community, not just the Black community, but especially the Black community, that just reverberates through the air when you're in these protests. And it's an outlet for so many people. You know, when you're walking with the protesters, when you're standing with the protesters, and people take to the megaphone, it's so personal for them. This happened in Minneapolis. George Floyd died in Minneapolis, but there are George Floyds in every city. And so you're walking with the protesters, you're talking to them, and you're hearing the names of Elazar Williams and Dante Ivey and Andrew Kearse being invoked by so many people. They have their own experiences with police brutality. Their friends and family have their own experiences with police brutality. And this week of protests was just this outpouring of frustration and grief and pain for years and generations of systemic racism and having these experiences with discrimination. That grief hung in the air.
To me, it feels like this situation is different than the other unarmed Black men that we've seen killed by police in the past, I don't know, 10 years. Do we know why, when you talk to people at these protests, why is there this new energy? Or at least it's perceived that way for me. It may not be that way for others.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a group of younger Black people today and brought that up with them. And Ferguson was what ignited the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And then you just heard everything silenced after a while. Some people theorize that it's because activists were muzzled. They weren't given the opportunity anymore to speak out. That energy, of course, is renewed now, like you said. I don't know if people think the movement itself is different from a few years ago, but I know they think that the results are different. I mean, you're seeing the police officers in Minneapolis actually getting charged and arrested, and you did not see that a few years ago. And so that's something that people have been bringing up, is that this time there's more of this momentum to mobilize, and for some reason now, maybe it's the current political environment, we're not entirely sure, but for some reason now officials are taking more of a step to hold the people accountable for the violence that they have committed against members of the Black community.
All right, Masara Makati from the Albany Times-Union, thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it here on New York Now.
Thanks so much, Dan.